He drew a chalk portrait of his late mother and got fined and publicly humiliated by the head of the HOA. Eleanor Shaw erased his artwork in front of everyone, mocking his autism like it was a threat to her perfect neighborhood. But his father posted the video, and 500 bikers from across the country showed up to stand by his side. Just wait until you hear how this story turned on its head, and why justice, in the end, came roaring down their street. Greg Bishop lived a quiet, deliberate life in the dry heat of southern Arizona. He ran a modest bike shop on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl stools, a Coke machine that still took quarters, and grease-stained photos of old Harley runs taped to the walls. Greg wasn't flashy. No roaring engines at 2 a.m., no leather ego on parade. He just loved the rhythm of fixing things, the whir of a rebuilt engine, the rattle of bolts falling into place. His hands were always busy, his boots always dusty, and his heart was anchored by one single thing, his son. Tyler was 15, a sweet, bright kid with a voice like a whisper and eyes that held entire galaxies. He wasn't into bikes, he wasn't into noise, and Greg never pushed him. Tyler preferred silence, colors, stories told through chalk and canvas instead of noise and chrome. Diagnosed with high-functioning autism at 8, Tyler's world had always been slightly out of sync with the noise of the rest. He struggled with small talk, avoided eye contact, and sometimes flinched when the world got too loud. But give him a box of chalk, and he'd draw until the sun went down. Whole adventures would unfurl in their driveway. Dragons, angels, sunsets, memories. Especially memories. 2 years ago, Tyler's mother, Lisa, was killed in a car accident. She'd gone out for milk and never came home. Greg had buried the love of his life under an old oak tree in Willow Rest Cemetery and came home with nothing but silence and a folded flag. Tyler never really spoke about it. Instead, he drew her, always in blue, always smiling. His latest piece had taken up nearly the entire sidewalk in front of their house. A portrait of Lisa, looking up at the sky, surrounded by chalk stars and the words, "Still watching." Then came the letter. Greg found it in the mailbox one Monday morning, stuffed between junk coupons and an overdue water bill. Thick envelope, red stamp, HOA violation notice. His gut clenched. He already knew. Notice of violation. Sidewalk chalk drawings found on community property. Subject, Tyler Bishop. Offense, defacing neighborhood aesthetics. Fine, $300. Immediate removal required. Greg stood frozen on the porch. Coffee went cold in his hand. His jaw tightened. The sidewalk wasn't community property. It was in front of their house. Tyler's tribute wasn't graffiti. It was grief, art, healing. And now, apparently, it was a crime. He stormed into the house, letter in hand, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. He looked over at Tyler, still in pajamas, chalk on his fingertips, quietly sketching a nebula on the kitchen notepad. Greg didn't say a word. He turned, grabbed his keys, and headed straight for the HOA office. They lived in a community run by one Eleanor Shaw, president of the HOA, self-declared protector of all things beige and boring. Eleanor had a spine like a steel rod and a voice like chipped porcelain. Her idea of a perfect neighborhood was symmetry, silence, and zero deviation. Decorative flags, banned, wind chimes, restricted. Kids with odd behavior, tolerated only until they colored outside the lines, literally. And Eleanor especially didn't like Tyler. She'd made that clear in passive-aggressive meeting minutes, in neighborly whispers, and in those overly sweet smiles that always came with a side of contempt. "He never says hello," she once told Greg at a block party. "Always looks at me like he's scanning my bones. Gives me the creeps." Greg had swallowed it then. But this was different. At the HOA office, Greg walked in gripping the letter like a weapon. The receptionist barely looked up. Eleanor sat at the back, flipping through a binder, lips pursed like she was sucking on a lemon. "I'm here about the violation," Greg said, his voice calm, too calm. Eleanor didn't even pretend to act surprised. "We have to maintain standards, Mr. Bishop. That drawing was his mother," Greg cut in. Silence. "She died 2 years ago," he said, voice shaking now. He drew her face, on the sidewalk, in chalk. Not spray paint, not blood, chalk. Eleanor sighed, like this was all beneath her. "Your son's..." condition doesn't exempt him from the rules. I'm sorry, but we have to be fair. Fair? Greg growled. You think this is fair? The woman didn't blink, and in that moment, Greg knew. This wasn't about chalk. It was about power, and they had just picked a fight they didn't understand. The room smelled like lemon polish and fake civility. Rows of folding chairs, a long plastic table at the front, HOA banners on the walls. The usual sterile theater of suburban authority. Greg had hoped for a quiet resolution. He'd told Tyler not to worry. The grown-ups could talk things out. That's what fathers did. Protect, buffer, translate the noise of the world. But the second they walked into that room, Greg felt it in his gut. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was an ambush. They sat in the back. Tyler hovered close, clutching the rolled-up drawing he'd done that morning. It wasn't the original. Eleanor had already ordered that one erased. But it was his attempt to recreate it. He had drawn Lisa's face again, as best he could, and shaded her eyes the same soft blue. Greg saw his son's fingers twitching, his chest rising and falling too fast. He reached over and rested a hand on Tyler's shoulder. It barely helped. At the front of the room stood Eleanor Shaw, HOA president, queen of control, executioner of joy. Her expression was frozen porcelain, her blazer precisely ironed, her pearl earrings barely moving as she turned to face the attendees. About a dozen board members sat beside her, including Carl Abrams, a retired architect with an ego bigger than his lawn ornaments. Greg raised a hand. "Thank you for allowing us to speak," he began, voice low. "My son didn't mean any harm. That drawing, it was of his mother. She passed away. It's how he remembers her. He didn't tag a wall. He used chalk. It washes away. Please, just let him be." There was a beat of silence, and then Eleanor stood. She didn't address Greg. Instead, she turned her gaze to Tyler, still half hidden behind his father, face downcast, shoulders drawn inward like he was trying to fold himself out of existence. Her smile was cold, surgical. "Well," she said lightly, "maybe if you were normal, we wouldn't have these issues, The air went out of the room. Tyler's head jerked up, stunned. Greg froze. Even a few of the board members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, but no one spoke. Then Carl snorted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sidewalk art?" he scoffed. "It's practically terrorism against neighborhood design. Imagine if everyone just started decorating public space with crayons and grief." Greg's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Tyler's shoulders trembled. He wasn't crying, not quite, but his lip was quivering, and his eyes were wide, glassy. He looked like someone who'd just been shoved underwater and didn't know which way was up. The board didn't see a quiet, gifted kid in pain. They saw a disruption, a checkbox on their agenda, something to scrub away. Eleanor moved around the table, slow and deliberate, high heels echoing on the tile floor. She stopped in front of Tyler, bent slightly, and without asking, without warning, reached into the small plastic tub someone had brought in and pulled out a wet rag. She held it up like a magician preparing a trick, then turned and dragged it across the chalkboard Tyler had brought in attempt to the drawing of his mother. One swipe, then another. Blue eyes vanished. She looked back at him. "See?" she said, voice sweet as poison. "Doesn't hurt." Tyler didn't move. He just stood there, breathing in shallow gasps, staring at the ruined image. Greg felt his heart crack. It wasn't just about the drawing. It was about dignity, about memory, about the idea that some people thought they had the right to erase someone else's grief because it didn't match the lawn. He wanted to yell, to throw the chair, to grab his son and run. Instead, he couldn't move. Not because he was frozen in fear, but because if he moved, he knew what would happen next. And it wouldn't be quiet. Tyler slowly stepped back. The rolled-up boards slipped from his fingers and landed with a dull thud. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just turned and walked out of the room, out the front door, into the night. Alone. They found Tyler 6 hours later. A trucker named Roy Jenkins spotted him at dawn, walking along Route 89 like a ghost cut out of the desert sky. The kid was barefoot, in flannel pajama pants, one arm wrapped around his chest, the other clutching a small plastic box of chalk. He looked straight ahead, blinking into the rising sun. A boy with a mission no one else could understand. He didn't wave, didn't cry, just kept walking. Roy pulled over, flipped on his hazards, and stepped out slow, arms raised like he was approaching a deer. "You okay, son?" he asked gently. Tyler stopped, looked up, and then, after a moment, nodded. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't have to. Roy found the address in the emergency info card folded in his pajama pocket, called it in, and stayed with him until Greg arrived. The whole ride over, Greg gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. His heart was pounding, a mix of fear, fury, and guilt, roiling inside him like storm clouds waiting to break. He kept thinking, what if Roy hadn't found him? What if it had been someone else, or no one? Tyler was sitting on the back bumper of Roy's truck when Greg pulled up. He wasn't crying, just holding the box of chalk in his lap, legs dangling, face blank. Greg didn't ask questions. He just crouched down, pulled his son close, and held him like he was made of smoke. Later, at home, Greg watched Tyler sleep on the couch under a pile of blankets. The box of chalk was still in his hand. He looked so small, so damn tired, and Greg knew this wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This wasn't about bylaws or fines or community standards. This was about decency. This was about his boy. Greg went into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table. He opened his laptop, pulled up the video he'd recorded at the HOA meeting. It wasn't perfect. Shaky hands, rough audio, but the moment was there. Eleanor's voice cutting into the silence, her cold words like ice to the skin. "Maybe if you were normal." And then the footage of her wiping away Tyler's drawing while the room watched in silence. Greg uploaded it, no hashtags, no dramatic caption. Just one line. "This is what they did to my son." He went to bed not expecting anything. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He just wanted people to see it, really see it. Maybe someone out there would understand. By morning, the video had over 400,000 views. By noon, it had crossed 1 million. At 5:43 p.m., Greg's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but something made him swipe. A deep, gravelly voice came through. "This, Billy, Sons of Valor MC. I saw the video. Brother, you need backup?" Greg blinked. Sorry, who is this?" "A veteran biker crew out of Flagstaff. We don't play politics, but we don't let kids get humiliated on their own street. You just say how many." Greg didn't have an answer. Billy chuckled. "Don't worry, we're coming anyway." Click. Greg stared at the phone. 10 minutes later, another call, then a message, then another. Some had seen the video. Others had it sent to them by friends, brothers, fellow riders. Photos of bikes, pledges of support, names, states, stories. One man from Tennessee wrote, "My boy's autistic. They tried the same thing with us. You ain't alone, man." 3 days passed. 412 messages. Dozens of voicemail recordings, growling engines in the background, promises whispered like war drums. One simple truth echoed through them all. We ride for our own. And in that moment, Greg understood. The street might have belonged to Eleanor Shaw on paper, but the world still had people in it. People who don't back down. People who fight when a kid's voice gets ignored. People who were already on their way. Saturday morning broke hot and heavy, the kind of Arizona heat that wrapped around your lungs and clung to the back of your neck. But the streets weren't quiet. Not today. Not this time. By 7 a.m., the neighborhood was no longer just rows of beige stucco homes and trimmed hedges. It was lined with chrome, leather, denim, flags, and thunder. Not police barricades, not city workers, bikers. Hundreds of them. Engines rumbled low and steady, like a storm rolling in. Tires lined the curbs. Kickstands clicked down. The air was thick with fuel, dust, and something else. Something deeper. Solidarity. The kind you didn't need to say out loud. They came from everywhere. Veterans from Montana in faded desert camo vests. Heavy-set mechanics from Dallas with beards down to their chests. Sleek black bikes from Seattle. Weather-beaten jackets from Alaska patched with ice blue wolves. Some rode solo, others in packs. all carrying their own stories, scars, and the same purpose: to stand for a kid none of them had ever met. Greg stood at the end of his driveway, one hand on Tyler's shoulder. His son was dressed in jeans and a fresh white t-shirt, hair still messy from sleep, eyes wide with the kind of silent awe kids aren't supposed to feel before they've lived through too much. The first bike pulled up and slowed to a crawl. A matte black Indian Scout, plates from Nevada. On the tank, scrawled in white chalk, were 7 words. "For Tyler, your mom would be proud." Tyler blinked, staring at it like it was a message from another world. Then came another bike, then 3, then 20. The line stretched down the block, curving around the cul-de-sac like a chrome snake swallowing the sun. Close to 500 riders in total. No chance, no noise. Just the steady rhythm of engines cooling under the rising heat. And then they dismounted, one by one, every man and woman among them. Boots hit pavement, and without instruction, without a word spoken, they moved as one. Not toward the house, not toward Greg, but to the sidewalk, to the drawing, the one Tyler had redrawn late into the night, his mother's face, the stars, the soft letters that said, "Still watching." They gathered around it in a silent semicircle. And then, without drama, without flair, they knelt. All of them, hard men with battle scars, old men with arthritic knees, women with braids under bandanas, and tears hiding behind mirrored sunglasses. Every last one of them dropped to one knee in front of a chalk drawing on the sidewalk, like it was a flag on the battlefield. No one spoke. No cameras. No slogans. Just presence. Tyler looked up at his dad, unsure what to do. Greg knelt beside him, whispering, "This is for you, kiddo. Just breathe." And Tyler stepped forward. His chalk box was in his hand again. He reached down and added one small detail to the corner of the portrait, a tiny heart next to his mother's smile. Then someone stood. A tall man in a weathered bomber jacket, silver hair pulled back into a ponytail, dog tags clinking softly as he moved. He had the posture of a soldier and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He walked straight to Tyler, crouched to meet his eyes. "You got a gift," he said quietly, "and you got guts. You're an artist, son, and you ain't alone." Tyler didn't respond at first. He just looked at the man, really looked, then gave a small nod. It was enough. The man stood again, raised one fist to the sky. Engines revved, 100 fists followed, but the roar wasn't angry. It was reverent. It was the sound of 500 people making a promise, not just to a boy with chalk, but to everyone watching from behind curtains and porch railings, wondering what it all meant. It meant, this street doesn't belong to fear anymore. It belongs to him. Eleanor Shaw stood at her window, white-knuckling the curtain as if sheer force could will the scene away. Her neighborhood, her meticulously trimmed, noise-regulated, HOA-certified paradise, now looked like something out of a dystopian biker documentary. Engines rumbled, flags snapped, leather and denim lined her sidewalks, and none of it was in the handbook. She'd called the police an hour ago, barely able to keep the tremble out of her voice. Unlawful assembly, she'd said, disturbing the peace, threats, weapons maybe. She didn't care what they were here for. She wanted them gone. And now, finally, sirens. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her pearl necklace, and marched outside just in time to see the cruiser roll up to the edge of the block, then slow and stop. The doors opened. 2 officers stepped out, but they didn't go for their radios. They didn't reach for anything. They took off their hats. Eleanor blinked. One of the bikers, tall, broad, face like weathered oak, stepped forward, nodded, and extended his hand to the nearest officer, Sheriff McAdams, retired technically, but his name still carried weight in the county, more than hers, that was certain. He shook hands with both officers, spoke quietly, respectfully. The officers listened, nodded. One of them smiled. Actually smiled. Then another man walked up, younger, maybe mid-30s, with a crisp, clean-cut beard and a leather jacket stitched with Wind Dogs MC Washington, D.C. across the back. Eleanor didn't recognize him until she did. Gavin Trent, son of Senator Patrick Trent, She'd seen him in campaign flyers, and now here he was, holding a helmet under one arm, watching her like a hawk sizing up a mouse. She stepped forward, desperate to reassert control. "That boy," she hissed, pointing directly at Tyler, "is disrupting the neighborhood. Public art on sidewalks is still vandalism under HOA statute." A voice cut through her like a scalpel. "Ma'am," one of the officers said sharply, "I'd stop right there." Eleanor turned, startled. Her mouth hung open slightly. "You are on record, in video footage, publicly humiliating a minor with a developmental condition," the officer continued. "That's verbal abuse, witnessed by multiple people. We've reviewed the recording. What you did was not just unethical, it may qualify as a civil rights violation under federal disability protection law." Eleanor flushed. "That's ridiculous. It was just enforcement of the rules. You wiped a child's memorial to his deceased mother off the ground in front of him," the other officer snapped, "and mocked him for not being normal. You have no legal ground to stand on, and right now, there's a federal inquiry being opened, so I'd advise you to step back and stop talking." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the bikers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Eleanor looked around, at the hundreds of eyes watching her, at the camera phones now aimed her way, at Tyler standing quietly with his chalkbox clutched to his chest. She turned back to the officers. "This is insane," she muttered, but it was thin, hollow. The HOA board members had gathered nearby. Most of them looked rattled. Carl Abrams, her old ally, had suddenly found something very interesting to study in the cracks of the pavement. That was when the paperwork arrived. 3 attorneys, one from Phoenix, one from Tucson, one from the ACLU. They handed Eleanor a printed packet with a yellow tab on the front page, notice of pending class action. The charges listed made her stomach churn: discriminatory practices, psychological harassment, abuse of power, violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. "This is absurd," she whispered, but her voice barely carried. Greg stood nearby. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just looked at her, calm, steady, unmoving, like a man who had already lost everything once and wasn't afraid of doing whatever came next. Eleanor's fingers twitched at her side, and for the first time since she became president of the HOA, she realized she wasn't in charge anymore. 1 week later, the city council chambers were packed. Reporters with notepads, local officials, concerned residents, and more than a few men in worn leather vests sitting in the back row, arms crossed, watching every word like hawks. The motion didn't take long. After the hearing, after the testimonies, after the video played 3 times on a projector screen so no one could claim they hadn't seen it, the vote was unanimous. The HOA charter was revoked. Eleanor Shaw was removed from office effective immediately. The city launched an audit into her tenure, citing targeted harassment of vulnerable residents, abuse of regulatory power, and possible civil rights violations. No one applauded, but the silence that followed carried more weight than a standing ovation ever could. Justice doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just exhales. The old HOA building sat empty for 2 days. On the 3rd day, the plywood sign went up. Coming soon, the sidewalk gallery, art from the edges. And on the following Saturday, the doors opened again. Not to rules, not to fines, not to cold stares and red ink on warning letters, but to color, to chalk and canvas, and tiny hands covered in dust and joy. The inaugural exhibition was titled Chalk on Concrete. Every piece was drawn by Tyler Bishop. His original drawings had been carefully photographed, reprinted, and framed. Some still carried the faint marks of grass stains and rainwater. Some had words scribbled in the corners. Remember, still watching, she liked blue. The centerpiece was a life-sized recreation of the erased memorial. Tyler had redrawn it from memory, even the shading around the eyes. It sat in the center of the gallery on the floor, not on the walls, so people had to look down to see it, just like he had. More than 700 people came that day. Neighbors, strangers, artists, kids from school, journalists, bikers in full patch, veterans in dress blues. The line wrapped around the block. No tickets, no admission fee, just a sign at the door that read, "This space belongs to anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet." Greg stood near the entrance, overwhelmed. He kept expecting someone to walk up and say it was all too much, that it had gone too far. But every time he looked around, he saw tears, laughter, pride, and above all, faces lit up by something rare in a town like theirs. Possibility. Then came the opening remarks. There was no ribbon, no podium, just a voice, rough, low, steady. The former Marine, the same one who had knelt in front of Tyler's drawing, stepped forward. His leather cut was clean, his boots scuffed, his hands weathered. He took no microphone, just walked to the center of the room and turned slowly, making eye contact with everyone. He looked at Tyler, then at Greg, then back at the crowd. "When the world falls apart," he said, voice steady as granite, "it's not politicians who rebuild it, not bankers, not boards or bylaws. It's the ones with the guts to feel something, to say something, to draw something." He paused, then nodded toward Tyler, who stood next to his father, gripping a piece of chalk, like it was the only thing keeping the room from floating away. "Artists," the man said, "they hold the pieces together. This boy held the line when the rest of us forgot where it was." Silence, then applause. Real applause, raw, loud, long. Tyler didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just smiled. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, and in that small gallery on that ordinary Saturday, in a town that once tried to erase him, a quiet truth settled into the bones of everyone present. He hadn't just drawn something, he'd redrawn everything. Tyler never became a celebrity. He didn't want interviews. He didn't do press. He didn't pose for cameras or sign chalk boxes like souvenirs. The gallery team had to beg him just to include a photo next to his art. And even then, it was blurry, taken from behind as he sketched in the driveway. Fame was never the goal. It wasn't even a concept that interested him. But something bigger happened. He became the reason grown men got off their bikes and said, "Enough." He became the quiet catalyst that sparked an army of strangers, tattooed, grizzled, hard-edged, to kneel down on hot pavement in front of a chalk drawing and remember what dignity looked like. And most importantly, he started drawing again, only this time not in secret. He drew on sidewalks, on canvas, on the inside walls of the new gallery. He drew in front of other kids, some of them nonverbal, some of them anxious, some of them shaking like he used to. He taught them how to layer color for shadows, how to blend without smudging, how to draw faces from memory. He never gave speeches, but he showed up, every day, quietly, consistently, with chalk dust on his hands and a focus that made adults go still. Greg watched it happen, and it moved him more than anything else ever had. That's when he started the foundation. He called it Chalk Wings, named after one of the Tyler's earliest drawings, a pair of wings so wide they stretched across their entire front porch. The nonprofit provided art supplies, mentorship, and therapy resources to children on the autism spectrum who had been bullied, shunned, or dismissed for being different. What started as a local thing turned national in a matter of weeks. Schools reached out. Parents wrote letters. Donations poured in from people who had never picked up a piece of chalk in their lives. It gave Greg a new purpose, a new fight. But not the kind with fists, the kind with light. The HOA, rattled by public backlash and legal exposure, tried to fight back. They filed a countersuit, citing reputational harm and defamation by viral content. It didn't go far. The judge threw it out in a single hearing, said the video spoke for itself, said Tyler's rights had been trampled, said the HOA should be grateful civil court was all they were facing. The countersuit collapsed with a whimper, much like the woman who started it all. Eleanor Shaw didn't resign. She disappeared, packed up her Range Rover in the middle of the night 2 weeks after the gallery opened and drove away. No farewell email, no statement, just gone. Some said she moved to Florida. Others whispered about a family member who'd intervened, quietly urging her to lie low while investigations continued. But whatever the truth was, one fact remained. She never returned. Her house sold within a month. The new owners put a wind chime on the porch, a pink flamingo on the lawn. And no one said a word. Greg sometimes passed the old place on walks with Tyler. He never pointed it out, never paused. But once, just once, Tyler did. He looked at the house, then down at his shoes, then up at his dad and said, "It's quieter now?" Greg nodded. It was. Not just the house, the whole street. Not perfect, not healed, but better. Because somewhere along the line, a boy who never asked for anything reminded an entire town what it meant to take up space without apology. Not with a roar, but with chalk. Every year, May 15th is no longer just another spring day. It's Street Art Day, a citywide celebration born from one boy, one drawing, and one act of quiet defiance. Sidewalks come alive with chalk. Stars, faces, names, wings. Kids draw barefoot, parents watch. No rules, no limits. And just like clockwork, the bikers return. Engines rumble through the streets, slow and steady. They don't roar, they roll, park, step off, hand out chalk. Some kneel and draw, some just watch. But they all remember why they came the first time. And why they keep coming back. At the center of it all is Tyler, no longer the boy hiding behind his father. He stands tall, chalkbox in hand, surrounded by color, surrounded by kids who now see themselves in him. This year, for the first time, he speaks. I didn't need 500 bikers to draw, he says, but now I know. The world isn't just people who erase, it's people who protect. The crowd goes quiet, then claps, then kneels, and kids keep drawing, louder, freer, bolder. Because this wasn't just a memory. It became a movement, a revolution, drawn in chalk.